The Birth of a Nation was a film made by D.W. Griffith, an extremely influential filmmaker that pioneered many editing techniques. It was the highest-grossing film until Gone with the Wind overtook it in 1939, which is the highest-grossing film ever, especially when adjusted for inflation. This movie starred acclaimed actors like Lillian Gish, who is nicknamed the First Lady of Cinema, and George Siegman, who has starred in many silent films of his time. There's one tiny caveat though. The movie falsely depicts the newly freed black people as the villains of the Reconstruction era and was a major contributor to the second coming of the KKK. The slave trade is a horrendous mark on American history. An estimated 6 to 7 million Africans were enslaved in the 18th century alone. They were used as cheap labor for plantations. As time went on, however, slavery was becoming less and less profitable to the point where slavery was bound to die out. Then came Eli Whitney with his invention of the cotton gin, which separated the cotton fibers from the seed, essentially rekindling the whole slavery industry and forever imprinting it in our country's history. The antebellum era is the period in American history after the War of 1812, but before the American Civil War. The word antebellum being derived from Latin, meaning before the war. The defining feature of the antebellum period is the growth of slavery in the South and the culture surrounding it. Slaves were considered property and worked on large plantations for their owners. This era in American history is essential to the birth of a nation. The North became more industrialized while the South became more dependent on agriculture and in turn, slavery. We see this divide manifest into the Civil War erupting in 1861 due to this increasing sectionalism between the North and the South. In the beginning of the war, many people thought that it would be an easy victory for the North. Wealthy people from the North came to picnic and spectate the easy victory that the Union would obviously pull off. On July 21st, 1861, began what would be the first major battle of the American Civil War, the First Battle of Bull Run. The people fled the scene as soon as the Union Army was pushed back. This revealed that the war was not going to be as easy as they thought it would be. At first, the Union's objective was for the country to be reunited, whatever the cost. As the war went on, it became obvious to President Abraham Lincoln that something had to change. In September of 1862, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, publicly making the Civil War about the issue of slavery. The proclamation freed all slaves in a Union-occupied territory in the South. The issue of slavery was now forever linked with the preservation of the Union. The European countries supporting the Confederacy stopped their aid promptly after the South was now associated with being pro-slavery. The South's whole economy relied on other countries for supplies and for the sale of their biggest export, cotton. Without this, the Confederacy could not outlast the Union's very urbanized economy. Reconstruction started with the radical Republicans in power, allowing them to pass the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, rightly called the Reconstruction Amendments. Slavery was legally abolished, all citizens are guaranteed equal rights under the law, and African Americans finally had the right to vote. The Reconstruction era progressed the civil rights movements farther than it had ever gone before, at least with regards to legislation. The biggest struggle was a shift in culture for the average Southerner. Freedmen still experienced widespread discrimination, even with the Reconstruction Amendments in place. Legislation can be passed with a simple vote, but one's prejudices can only change through time and experience, which is especially difficult when paired with beliefs that develop under heavy emotion. The first KKK disappeared because white supremacy was very much alive during Reconstruction, which was their main point for existing. If Jim Crow laws were present, there was little reason for the Klan to be fully active. The movie follows the story of two families, one from the North, called the Stoneman, headed by abolitionist Austin Stoneman, from the House of Representatives with his daughter and two sons, and the other family from the South, called the Cameron, headed by Dr. Cameron with his wife, 3 sons, and 2 daughters. Both families are good friends, as shown by the Stoneman's visit to the Cameron's plantation. They happen upon a newspaper that had the headline of, "If the North carries the election, the South will secede." Shortly after, President Lincoln is signing a proclamation asking for 75,000 volunteers to fight for the Union. The sons from both families enlist in their corresponding army. The Civil War part concludes with the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, just 5 days after the Confederate surrender in the Appomattox Courthouse. South Carolina was having its gubernatorial elections, and Silas Lynch, a black apprentice under Austin Stoneman, was elected as the lieutenant governor. Both went to South Carolina to ensure that the Reconstruction policies are being put into effect. And here is where blacks started to be portrayed as the evil during Reconstruction. They were depicted with offensive stereotypes, such as committing voter fraud by stuffing the ballots with votes, drinking alcohol, and eating fried chicken while they were in the South Carolina legislature. Then we see Gus, a freedman professing his love for Flora Cameron. He's turned down by her, but he cannot accept it, and Gus chases her as they go deeper into the forest. She jumps off a cliff and dies because Gus did not stop his pursuit. Flora's brother, Ben, sees this, and the Klan will jump into action, eventually lynching Gus. The Klan puts his body on the steps of Lynch's house as a warning. Lynch then passes legislation that allowed mixed-race marriage and banned the Klan uniform. Dr. Cameron was found in possession of Ben's Klan clothing and was going to be carried away to jail until one of the Stonemen, named Phil, and some of the Cameron's black servants helped him get away. They all flee into the woods and find a hut owned by 2 former Union soldiers willing to conceal them from Lynch's men. Meanwhile, Elsie talks to Lynch to try to release Dr. Cameron. Lynch uses this as an opportunity to force her into marrying him. He tries to force himself onto her and even tells his servants to prepare for a marriage. The Klan rides into town, drives out Lynch's men, and takes control of the town. They get Lynch and save Elsie. While this is happening, Lynch's men are outside the hut where Dr. Cameron is hiding. They refuse to give him up, and a fight occurs all around the hut. The Klan learns of the altercation and comes in and saves the day. The ending scene depicts a figure on an animal wielding a sword, swinging it around, while dozens of people lay dead under him. The prior scene fades into an image of many people rejoicing under an image of Jesus Christ. Despite the racist rhetoric, or maybe thanks to it, the movie exploded with popularity. Several newspapers praised the film, citing that more than one eye shed tears at the scene of sadness and sorrow entailed by war, and more than once the audience was stirred to a gripping silence, and more than once provoked to applaud with unrestrained approval. And the movie tells the story of a birth of a nation that every son and daughter of the nation should see. Critics of the movie, mostly blacks, condemned the movie for its justification of the Klan and its portrayal of them. The mayor of Chicago banned the movie from showing in theaters during his tenure. The Birth of a Nation brings the lost cause ideology into effect, which gives this false narrative that the whites were oppressed and black people were the villains, committing many horrific acts and having the KKK save the day. The South was painted as noble and chivalrous, while the Northerners were money-hungry and hostile to the South. Believers of this theory thought that the South wouldn't have been a lost cause if the Northerners had just followed the civility of the Southerners before the war. These myths were used to keep the lost cause narrative alive. The Birth of a Nation was the first ever movie shown in the White House. President Woodrow Wilson was infamous for being extremely racist, even for the time. He was a Southerner who was very segregationist and supported the lost cause sentiment. He is the only president to have a PhD, and yet, as a historian, Wilson applauded the movie and said that his only regret was that it was all so terribly true. The movie was the frontier for the second wave of the KKK, solely basing their hatred for blacks just because of their skin color and the preconceived notions they had because of their prior status as a slave. Population of Klan members went past 4 million in the US. The popularity from the film made the fees from being in the Klan very profitable. The KKK saw a major revival from the movie that it will never see as strong again.